Glad to have everybody with us. Today we have with us Ken Phillips, and he is the founder and CEO of Phillips Associates, a consulting company with expertise in predictive learning analytics and measurement and evaluation of learning. He has more than 30 years experience designing learning instruments and assessments, and he's authored more than a dozen published learning instruments. He also is the creator of a revolutionary new measurement and evaluation methodology that applies predictive analytics to learning and is a contributing author to 5 books in the L&D field. Ken regularly speaks to ATD groups, university classes, and corporate L&D groups, and since 2008 has spoken at the ATD International Conference on topics related to measurement and evaluation of learning. I am very excited to hear what Ken is going to share with us today on how we can boost our training transfer using predictive learning analytics. Ken, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Janet. You read that just like I wrote it. I I was waiting for where you were going to ad lib and put in some more interesting things. So, well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to my session on Boost Training Transfer using Predictive Learning Analytics. I'm going to share with you some things during our time together this afternoon that I hope you will find thought-provoking and possibly even amazing, because specifically what I'm going to show you is how we can predict learner on-the-job outcomes and actions at the conclusion of a learning program, and how we can also then change those outcomes and actions for the better by using two tools. One is predictive analytics, by applying predictive analytics to learning, and also data-driven decision-making to learning. So we're going to talk about how to do both of those. And as I'm sure you're probably aware, predictive analytics is a really hot topic in most organizations today, and is being used in a variety of different departments in various organizations, ranging from marketing to sales to customer service and manufacturing, and even more recently, although it's relatively new, predictive analytics has made its way into the human resources area, where organizations are using predictive analytics for hiring purposes, for retention purposes, and so it's HR will be using predictive analytics to try to enhance their operations and the things they're responsible for. But traditionally, and conspicuous by its absence, is learning and development, and there hasn't been much, if very little, I should say, predictive analytics applied to learning. And so my intent during our time together this afternoon is I'm going to show you how we can join all the cool kids in the other departments who are using predictive analytics, and how we can apply predictive analytics to learning. So basically that's where we're headed. I've got 3 things I'm going to focus on for the agenda. I want to spend a little bit of time at the beginning positioning and give you some context for why predictive learning analytics and data-driven decision-making can be useful for us in learning. And so we want to talk a little bit about the term scrap learning. And if you haven't heard of that term before, you will be familiar with it when we're just here in a couple minutes. And also talk about the impact scrap learning has on both wasted organizational resources, as well as how it causes us as learning and development professionals to lose credibility with our stakeholders. And I'll say more about that here in a second. Second major agenda item is I'm going to show you how we can build an algorithm or a mathematical model where we can collect data with that model and then predict which learners attending our training program are most and least likely to apply what they learned in that training program back on the job. So we can predict right at the end of that training program which of these learners are most likely and least likely to apply what they've learned. And we can also, using the same data from that algorithm, we can predict which managers of the learners are likely to do a good or a poor job of supporting the training. So we can not only predict what's going to happen with the learners, we can also predict what's likely to happen with the managers and their support of the training that they sent their employees to attend after they get back on the job. And we're going to do all this, and part of this in the last agenda item will be to share with you. I've been working on this for about a little over 2 years now, so it's still a little bit of a work in progress, but I think it's nearing its final completion in terms of being, having all the various parts and components settled and organized and all of that. So we're going to examine the 3-phase, 9-step predictive learning analytics methodology that I've been working on. And I'm going to actually, when we go through there and do that, I'm going to share with you data from a company that actually implemented the methodology. So the data you'll be seeing about which learners are most likely, least likely, which managers are likely to do a good job and a poor job, and obstacles to training and so forth. All the different things we're gonna cover will be actual data from a real live client that's been using the methodology since right before we started in the fall, so it was like October when we started. I guess it was October, November, early November. So they're not through the whole process yet, but I'm going to share with you the data that we've collected up to the point where they are right now with the using the methodology. So scrap learning, let's talk a little bit about that, and many of you may also already know what that term means, but if you don't, here's the definition. This definition was coined by a company called Knowledge Advisors, and they are a software company here in Chicago that created the platform called Metrics That Matter that lots of organizations use to automate their measurement and evaluation of learning process. And so they were the ones that came up with this term, although other people have talked about it as well. So, but it's scrap learning is really the term that describes the gap or the difference between learning that's delivered and learning that's applied back on the job. So that's basically what the definition of scrap learning is. So it's just the difference between what was delivered and what's applied back on the job. And so the analogy that I like to use when I think about scrap learning is it's like the 3-ton elephant in the room whenever we talk to a business executive about designing and implementing a training program to meet some kind of a need that the business executive might have. And it's the 3-ton elephant in the room because we as learning and development people know that regardless of how well we design a training program, that there's going to be a certain percentage of people who attend the training who are not likely to go back and apply what they've learned, or certainly not go back and apply all the things that they learned. But it's also something that the business executives are aware of because they've sent people to training programs before. They know when people come back from a training program, just based on what they've observed, that some of the people that they sent are going to go back and apply it and use it and make it work. Others are going to go back and may try it out for a while and then end up reverting back to their old ways. And then there's probably other people that they have that they sent that come back and do absolutely nothing. And so that's the 3-ton elephant that's in the room, but we never talk about it with any of our business executives when they ask for training. So it's because we don't have any way to effectively measure and manage the amount of scrap learning that's associated with any of our training programs. So it's the thing that is in the room, it's the elephant in the room, but nobody ever talks about it because we just don't have any way to, at least previously, we've not had any way to measure and manage it. So the question is, how big is the problem? Some of you may be familiar with some of this research, but in case you're not, I will just quickly run through it. And so before we do that, I have a quick poll here that I'm going to launch. And so in the average organization, what percent of learning that's delivered do you think ends up as scrap? So you can select the choices there, 25%, 45%, 65%, or 85%. So go ahead and click on one of those, and then I'll share with you the actual data, the actual results.
Okay. So I'm going to, so we have about 82% of the group that has voted. I'm going to give it a couple of more seconds,
Okay.
and I'll close it. Okay, I'm going to close the poll now. And so Ken, our answers, 33% said 25% answer A.
Okay.
56% answer C, and 11% chose answer D.
What about B?
No one chose B.
No one told, okay. So 33, 0, 56, and 11.
11, yes.
Okay. Well, so this is the type of multiple choice test that you always wished you had gotten when you're in school, because the answer here is, oops, wait a second. There we go. The answer is, if you selected 45%, 65%, or 85%, you would have been right. So it depends on the research study you're looking at. There have been multiple research studies that have been done to look at scrap learning and, you know, how big of an issue it is. And the answers or the results ranged anywhere from, you know, the lowest one I think I've seen is 40%, and the highest one is 90%. Most of them are somewhere in here between 45 and 85%. I'm going to share with you two benchmark research studies that are fairly well known and will give us some idea about how big the problem is and how these numbers relate to these two benchmark research studies. So the first one was done by, this was also done by Knowledge Advisors, the folks that created the Metrics That Matter software platform for evaluating learning programs. And so they went into the back end of the program after they, you know, they had lots of customers that had used were using Metrics That Matter. And so Knowledge Advisors went into the back end and took a look at the data that they were collecting, and based on all the data that they collected and had available to them, and this is, you know, tens of thousands of data points from all their various customers. And what they found is that in the average organization, 45% of all learning that's delivered ends up as scrap. So roughly half, little less than half. And this study was done in, as you see at the bottom there of the slide, it was done in 2014. And there's a second one, and this was done by a guy by the name of Robert Brinkerhoff. Some of you might know who he is. He is he's since retired, but he was a professor at Western Michigan University in a graduate program in human resource development. And so he did this research study, as you can see at the bottom of the slide here, back in 2004. And what he found was that slightly more than 15% of the people who attend a learning program are going to go back and apply what they've learned, almost regardless of what we as learning and development people, you know, do with them following or don't do with them following the training program. So about a little more than 15% are going to go back and make it happen. And they're going to go back and apply what they've learned. Slightly less than 20% are going to go back and do absolutely nothing. So they'll come to your training program, they'll drink your coffee, eat your donuts, and they're going to go back and do absolutely nothing. And then he found in the middle group, about 65% of the learners are going to go back and try to apply some of the things that they learned. But what happens is that what he found was what happens is over time, and within like 30 days, sometimes sooner, but certainly by the end of 30 days, they're going to end up reverting back to their old ways. So they go back and try, but they don't permanently apply the different things that they learned. So those are the two benchmark research studies. So if you add the slightly less than 20% together with the 65%, then the scrap learning, the percentage that Robert Brinkerhoff came up with would be somewhere in the neighborhood of 80 to 85%. So those kind of represent the, the two ends of the continuum, the 45% and the 80 to 85%. So if we take a look at how this impacts individual organizations, I just took two pieces of data from the ATD 2017 State of the Industry Report. And so this is, hundreds of organizations that submit data for this State of the Industry Report, and ATD does an annual report. And so the two pieces of data that I took from the report are the average per employee training expenditure, which in the 2017 State of the Industry Report, this is actually looking back. So this 1273 represents the data that they collected in 2016, but the report was actually published in 2017. So the data in these reports always lags by a year. But the average per employee training expenditure was 1273, and the average number of training hours consumed by or per employee was 34.1, as you can see on the slide. So what I did is I just took those two figures, the average dollar expenditure per employee training expenditure and the average number of hours, and I just multiplied them then times the scrap learning figure that knowledge advisors found. And so if you take the 1273 and multiply it times 45%, $573 out of the 1273 is scrap, and out of the 34.1 hours, 15 of those are scrap. And of course, the knowledge advisors are the optimists. So if you look at the data from applying the Brinkerhoff research, and I used 80%, not 85%. So I didn't try to make it look worse than, I tried to take a conservative approach. And so the out of the 1273, then $1,018 is scrap learning. That's wasted money. And out of the 34.1 hours, 27 of the hours is wasted time. People might as well not have even been there. So that gives you some idea about how big the problem is. And so I summarize it this way. Houston, we have a problem. And so I thought that was appropriate for this group. And but in the interest of full disclosure, I'll tell you I use this for every time I do the presentation. Houston's always mentioned. So so now the question is, what are we going to do about this? So that gives you some background in terms of what scrap learning is, how big of an issue it is, and so now we want to move forward with so we know all that. What can we do about it? And so the solution that I've been working on for the last couple of years is something that I call Predictive Learning Analytics. And by way of a definition, Predictive Learning Analytics is a process or a methodology that I've created for peering into the future at the conclusion of a learning program. So we're going to peer into the future, what's going to happen now after people have attended this learning program, and predicting outcomes and actions with the intent of changing those outcomes and actions for the better. So the whole idea behind the methodology is it's not just an intellectual exercise to be able to identify who the learners are that are likely to apply and not likely to apply, who the managers are that are going to likely to do a good job, poor job, what the scrap learning is. It's not just an intellectual exercise, but we're gathering this data so that we can, try to change those outcomes and actions for the better following the training program. So that's the definition. So the mission is to provide L&D professionals, folks like us, with a systematic, credible, and repeatable process for maximizing the value of the learning and development investments that the corporation's making by measuring and managing the amount of scrap learning associated with those investments. So that's the mission. It gives us a tool that we can use to actually measure and manage the amount of scrap learning associated with those investments, learning and development investments, so that we can take the elephant out of the room and actually have discussions with business executives about not only the training that they would like to see us design and implement, but also then how together we can partner with the business executive to ensure that there's maximum value achieved from the learning by ensuring that the greatest majority of people possible apply what they've learned back on the job. So just a quick comment about how predictive learning analytics differs from traditional learning measurement and evaluation. There's two basic ways that it's different. You're all familiar with the 4 levels or 5 levels of evaluation in the Kirkpatrick-Phillips evaluation model. And so the predictive analytics focuses in on individual learners, and that's different from traditional learning measurement and evaluation, which tends to focus on programs or cohorts. So when we use the traditional 5-level evaluation model, we're typically evaluating programs, and how well the program worked and so on, but we're not looking at unique individuals. We might be evaluating cohorts where perhaps we have people from different departments attending the training, and so we might be looking at groups of people, from this department versus people from a different department, but it's, again, not focused on individuals. And the second major difference is that predictive learning analytics is designed to predict the future likelihood of certain behaviors and actions, which we've already talked about, and traditional learning measurement and evaluation is backward-looking and describes what's happened. So think of PLA or predictive learning analytics focusing on individuals, not programs or groups, and being forward-looking and predicting the likelihood of future outcomes and actions, whereas traditional M&E focuses in on what's already happened. So it's not trying to look to the future. So this is the model that I've been working on and that I created back in 2000 and well, it was right around 2000 and the end of 2014, early 2015. This is like the third iteration of the model, but I broke it down. I created this this process or methodology that consists of the 3 phases that you see here. Phase 1 is all about data collection and analysis. We'll take a look at each one of the 4 steps and talk about those here in a minute. And then phase 2 is, after we've done the data collection and analysis, then we want to take that data and do something with it and apply data-driven decision-making to our learning so that we can change the outcomes for that learning program for the better, so that we're increasing training transfer, decreasing scrap learning, getting more people to apply what they've learned, getting more managers to do a better job of supporting the training, and so on. And then phase 3 is all around reporting out your results. So those are the 3 phases. So we're going to run through the methodology. Before we do that, I just want to connect the methodology back to the definition that we talked about earlier. So phase 1, the data collection analysis, think of that as peering into the future and predicting learner outcomes and actions. Remember, that was the first part of the definition. Phase 2, the solution implementation, that's all about changing the outcomes and actions for the better. So that's where we're going to try to increase the value of the learning investment. And then phase 3 is just reporting out the results. So let's walk through here, and we'll, as I said, when we get through here, when we get to here in a couple seconds, I'm going to identify the client. I won't tell you what the name is, but I'll show you what they did and so on, so I can share with you actual results, and it won't be just theoretical. It'll be you can actually see what happened. But phase 1, step 1, we need to select a learning program and identify what I call the calibration cohort. Those are the people, the initial people going through this program that we're going to use to collect all this data from, so that people coming through the learning program following them will then benefit from all the things that we learned from this initial calibration cohort. Now, the calibration cohort also benefits from this as well, but the people who are going to follow through later on are going to get it in a much more sequenced, logical, systematic way, whereas the calibration cohort, as we're collecting all this data from them and working with them and so on to come up with solutions for implementation and so on, they're getting it a little more sporadically as opposed to systematically. But 3 guidelines for selecting a learning program. First guideline is that we want to focus on planned learning initiatives, not informal learning events. This methodology will work better with planned learning initiatives. So things that are scheduled, planned, and so on, rather than some kind of informal, like a lunch and learn or something like that. That would be like an informal learning event. And also, I recommend selecting a program that has a high profile. In other words, if you're going to invest the time and energy in applying predictive analytics to that program, pick something that executives in the organization care about. Pick a program that they care about. Typically, high-profile programs are ones that are expensive, and like leadership development programs tend to be very expensive. So if it's got a lot of high costs associated with it, then business executives are concerned about whether or not they're getting value from that investment. So that would be an example of a high-profile program. Or if there's going to be a lot of people going through the program, for example, like let's say the organization decides to implement a new performance management system, and so everybody is going to have to go through this. Now, the training might be a little bit different for managers and supervisors versus employees, but nevertheless, everybody's going to go through it. And again, that will have a high profile because of the amount of time that's going to consume in terms of people being away from the job. So that would have a high profile. Or if it's a program that's really targeted at some kind of organizational strategic initiative or goal that's important to the organization, that will also be a program that has a high profile. So just select something that's got a high profile, so when you come up with your results, that people are going to be interested in it, and also people will be more inclined to be supportive of your efforts to try to measure and manage the scrap learning associated with the program. And the last guideline would be select a program where there's a fairly large number of participants that are scheduled to attend over a relatively short period of time. It doesn't have to be all in the same week or even in the same month. It could be spread over a little bit of time. But the ideal number of people in the calibration cohort is, and this is a rough guideline, and I've got a client I'm working with now where they don't have 40, but the ideal number would be somewhere between 40 and 60. And again, that, as you'll see when we get through here, that also, if you have a number that large, it enables us to not use the same people all the time for all the things that we need to collect data from them. And so it's we don't want them to suffer from survey fatigue and all that kind of stuff. So if you've got 40 to 60, that's kind of the ideal number. It'll work with numbers smaller than that, but that would be but this would be the ideal number. So phase 1, step 2 is, now that we've selected a program, next thing is to build the PLA algorithm. and create a survey. So the algorithm is really the heart of the predictive process and consists of 12 factors or input variables that can be used to make training transfer predictions. And all of these factors are based on research that's been done in the area of training transfer. And also, all 12 factors are aligned with what other research has found to be the three components of training transfer. So if you look around, if you look at any of these research studies that I've listed there, you will see that basically what the researchers are saying is, look, there are three major components that really contribute to training transfer. And the first one of these is the learning program design. And just as a sidebar, that's the one that receives the vast majority of attention. You know, because if you go to like the conferences, the HED International Conference or other conferences, you will find that there's a lot of the sessions are all around learning program design topics. But there are two other components that are also equally important, yet they don't receive typically the same amount of attention. The second one are learner attributes. Those are things about the learners themselves. And then the third one, major component, would be the learner work environment. So it's all three of those in combination that are going to have an effect on training transfer and reducing scrap learning. Also, the learning program design is something that we as L&D professionals have direct control over, right? We control that. So we can, you know, we can have direct influence on what the learning program design looks like. But while we don't have direct control over the learner attributes, we can influence those. And so there are things that we can do, for example, to you know, make people, ensure that people feel confident or more confident anyway when they leave a training program, so they feel like they can go back and try out what they've learned. And same way with the work environment, we don't have direct control over that, but we can influence that. And it's only when we're able to try to move these three components and overlap them that we're going to achieve success and get learning that's applied on the job. So we need to look at all three of the components and not just focus in on one or two, but really all three of them are important. So I'm going to have you type in the chat, just take a second here, and keeping in mind the three training transfer components, before I share with you what the factors are that I've identified in my research, what factors are you aware of that are known to contribute to training transfer? And so I've given you an example here. Training transfer increases when learners have an immediate opportunity to apply what they learned in the program back on the job, and that's a work environment component. But if you take a look at the three components, just type in chat, see if you can come up with some other things that might be related to the learning program design, learner attributes, or the learner work environment that would contribute to training transfer. What kinds of things are you aware of?
Okay, Ken, some
Yep.
of them are that question. So Colleen said when training is interactive.
Okay, good.
Bethany responded when training involves hands-on learning, which is the same as kind of the same, you know, active and.
Yep. That would be another one.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else?
Not yet. Okay,
right.
we have Patricia. She said, hold on. Bring your questions about the topic to the session and struggle.
Ah, okay, yeah. All right. Bring your questions about the topics that are going to be covered and your struggles with those. Yeah, that's good. Okay.
And she also says interactivity.
Interactivity. Okay. All right. So we've got a number of them. And so most of those, again, if you saw, they focused on the learning program design.
You move on. Lisa says, when managers support the learner to be accountable to apply what was learned in the work environment.
Okay, good. All right, so there we've got a learner work environment example besides the one that I had provided as the example. Okay, good. So let me share with you the research, what I found, the factors that I found. Again, all these have a research base where I found research that shows that these factors contribute to training transfer. And so I'm going to talk about the 12. I've got 5 of them that relate to the learning program design, 4 of them that relate to the learners themselves, learner attributes, and 3 of them that relate to the learner work environment. So let me just run through these. So one of the factors that I found is that, and this one is probably common sense, but that new information has to be acquired. So if people come to a training program, if they don't acquire anything new, then there's nothing new to go back and apply on the job. So they've got to acquire some kind of new information when based on attending the training program. Also, they need to view the program that they've attended as relevant to themselves and to their job. So that was another factor. So that might be making sure you got the right people in the room. It might also make sure that you've got the right examples in the training design, so that people see the content and everything that's being covered is relevant to them and their job. They also, another factor I found was that the learners view the program as an important investment in their career development, and that they see how attending this program and learning the things that are being taught in the program are going to somehow connect to their career in their job and their career development opportunities. So that would be a third factor that's on the program design. Fourth one on the program design is that the learner is going to see a likely improvement in a key department business metric if the new information learned is applied back on the job. What this gets at is, do people know why they're in the training, and do they understand how this learning what they're going to learn is going to contribute to the things that are taking place in their department. So they have to see that connection, and oftentimes, as I'm sure you have seen, that gets missed. People don't understand why they're being asked to attend the training. They don't see the connection between why they're going and how that's going to have some positive effect on business results in their department. And then the last one is that the learner is likely to recommend the program to his or her work colleagues. So those are all things about the program design. Now the learner attribute factors, there are 4 of these, and one is the learners are personally motivated to apply what was learned. Again, we don't have direct control over these, but we can influence it. So if learners understand from the program design, why they're there, and how this is going to help them in their career, how it will help them improve, what they're doing back on the job and improve business operations in the department. They understand all that, then they're much more likely to be personally motivated. So, but that would be one factor that's a learner attribute. Second factor for learner attributes would be how confident they are in their ability to apply what was learned. So if they leave the training and they're not confident that they can go back and apply this, then they are not likely to go back and try it out and apply anything. And so that's where we end up increasing scrap learning. And so some of the comments that were mentioned earlier about hands-on learning, interactive, those are all ways at building confidence in the learner so that they've had a chance to practice before they get back on the job and feel a little more confident about their ability to use what they learned. Factor number 8 is The learner takes time to reflect on the key lessons that were learned in the program and how they can help the learner improve his or her performance. Research has found that reflection, just the act of reflecting, is a critical component of training transfer. And so you can build that in to build it into the training program design, for example, by giving people 2 or 3 minutes at the end of a module to just reflect on, what was covered, what they learned, how they think what they learned can help them improve what they've learned back on the job. And it's also then reflecting at the end of the program on what was covered, what they learned, and again, how it's going to help them apply what they learned during the training and how it will help them apply that back on the job. So it's the act of reflection. Number 9 is the learner views the program as an opportunity to learn challenging new things. And so there are some learners that come to our programs who are probably like us, lifelong learners. We're eager to learn new things. We look forward to it. But there's also other learners that are much more, they're called more performance oriented. And so they see applying new things as risky because it might negatively affect their performance. So they're not eager to learn new things. And so we can help people who have a more performance orientation as opposed to a learning orientation, help them to understand that, they don't have to go back and be experts at this, that there's a period of time, to ramp up and become and master what they've learned, and so begin to influence the way the learners think about the training. And then the work environment factors, we got 3 of those. This one was mentioned. Managers actively engage the learners post-program regarding what was learned. The work colleagues support what the learners learned post-program when they go back and try to apply new things. And then the learners have an immediate opportunity to apply what was learned. So those are the 12 factors. And so what we want to do in step 2 is to convert the 12 factors into survey items that reflect the content of the target program, and then take those survey items and either incorporate them into an existing level 1 evaluation or administer the survey as a separate survey immediately following the training. And you can do it either way. One organization I worked with included it as part of the existing level 1 evaluation. Another organization did it as a separate survey following the training. And I've just given some sample survey items. So I took the relevancy one. They need to see the program as relevant. So the survey question would be, how relevant is you insert the program name, program to you and your job? And so they'll answer that. And then I took the confidence one, which was from the learner attributes. How confident are you in your ability to apply the knowledge, skills, and behaviors you learned in the blank program back on the job? And so these are sample survey items. So you take each of the 12 factors, convert them into survey items like this, and then, as I said, either include them in your level 1 evaluation or administer a separate survey. So now we're going to talk about, we've done that, we've collected the data, and now let's take a look at what we can do with the data and how we can summarize it to help us begin to understand what's likely to happen with the learners following the training program. So this is the case study, though. The company is a medical insurance company, and their business objective for the learning program was to improve operational efficiencies, and the learning program that they used to apply the predictive learning analytics methodology was a continuous process improvement program. And the calibration cohort, the number of people that were used to collect the data from and so forth, were 74 participants that went through this program back late last fall. And so these were the scores, and we call these the Learner Application Index scores. That's what LAI stands for. And so these were the scores that we were able to compute from the answers to the 12 questions that each participant completed when they completed the survey. So the numbers in the left-hand side, the 4-digit numbers that are in the gray and in the white, those are individual learners. So each number relates to an individual learner. And the numbers in the colored columns to the right represent the average score that that learner had on the 12 survey factors. So you can see there the learner 1047, the average score for the 12 survey factors for learner 1047 was 6.83 on a 7-point scale. And so that's what you're looking at here. And so the people that are in the green, these are the people who are most likely to go back and apply what they learned in that program back on the job based on their scores and how they responded to those 12 survey questions. The folks in the yellow are what we call at risk of not applying. They're the ones that are going to go back and try it out, but ultimately will end up reverting back to their old ways. And then the red folks are the ones who are least likely to go back and do anything. So they're the ones that are going to attend your training and drink your coffee, eat your donuts, and go back and do nothing. So that's how we take that data, take the scores on those 12 survey items, and then compute these learner application index scores. We put them into numeric order, and then what we did is we applied the Brinkerhoff methodology research that Brinkerhoff found. So the people in green are the top 15% of scores. The people in yellow are the middle 65% of scores, and the people in the red are the bottom 20% of scores. So we're able to take the numbers, crunch the numbers, look at the data, and then sort learners into these 3 different groups. We can also do the same thing using the same data, and we can identify managers that are likely to do a good job and a poor job of supporting the training. So if you see in the first column of the slide, the manager PLA number, each one of those numbers represents a unique manager. Second column is the number of direct reports that each manager had attend that continuous process improvement training. The third column, the average manager score, is the average score that manager received from the direct reports that that manager had attend the training. So for manager 35 to 50 and had 4 direct reports, and the average score on that factor that we looked at was factor number 9, you remember, from the learner work environment, and it was the measuring or looking at how likely the manager was to be actively engaged with the learner post-program. And so we took the 4 direct reports, looked at how they answered that question, and came up with an average manager score. And we did that for each one of the managers that you see listed here. Then the next column is we took the learner application index scores. And so this is again, manager 35 to 50 had 4 direct reports. We went back in and looked at the previous chart. We found those 4 direct reports, and then we computed an average learner application index score based on how those 4 direct reports responded to the 12 survey items. And so then what we were able to do is we then subtracted the difference between the manager average and the learner application index average, and so we came up with what we call the manager training support index score. And so when you look at this data, then what it shows is that these managers are likely to do a good job because they have positive manager training support index scores, and these managers are likely to do a poor job of supporting the training because they all have negative Manager Training Support Index scores. Okay? So the other thing we took a look at was the three components, because we wanted to see if the three components were contributing differentially to training transfer. And so we took the responses to all the different questions that were in each one of those components that we reviewed before. And so what we came up with here is that you can see the learner attributes index score was the highest. So the learners tended to be motivated. They looked forward to learning new things. They reflected on what they and what they learned would help them improve. And they also were fairly confident in terms of their ability to go back and apply what they learned. And so what we did is, after we came up with an average score for each of the components, we wanted to look at the differences among the scores. And so what we found was there was a statistically significant difference between the learner attributes index and the learner work environment index. So it was not only a numeric difference between 5.90 and 5.38, but that difference was also statistically significant. We also found that there was a statistically significant difference between the learning program design index and the learner work environment index. And we found that there was no statistically significant difference between the learner attributes and the learning program design. And so what all that said was that learner work environment was, when we're looking at the components, that's the one that should receive the highest priority, because it was statistically significantly different from the other two components and was the lowest one. So in terms of thinking about what we need to do differently in the future and how we can change and manage scrap learning, we need to focus in on learner work environment index. The other thing that was interesting about this one was the lowest score was the question around whether or not the learners acquired new information. And so this was a surprise to that company. And so what they did is they went out and grabbed a handful of the learners and they started asking them questions about, why was this score so low? And what they found was that a whole lot of their employees that were being asked to attend this program had either been through a previous continuous process improvement training, maybe not there at that company, but at a previous company, or they had received the same information in school. So what that said to them was, we need to do a better job of vetting who gets into this training, because there may be a lot of people that we don't have to put through the training. We could just give them a job aid and say, well, here, review this. This is all you need to, just as a reminder, but you've already had, all the training. So that's how they started looking at the using the data to make data-driven decisions. So the last step in phase one is we're now going to calculate scrap learning and also identify real-time obstacles that are preventing training transfer. And so we're doing this 30 days post-program, so 30 days after the program, and we're going to collect data from a random sample of the calibration cohort participants, then using either a survey or focus groups, and ask these three questions. What % of the program material are you applying back on the job? Again, keep in mind, we're doing this 30 days after the training. So what we did is also, we provided all the people that were part of the random sample of people, we provided them with a summary of the training so that they remembered what was covered prior to asking them these questions. And so then once they reviewed the summary of what was covered in the training, we asked them the question. So what % of the program material did you apply back on the job? How confident are you that your estimate is accurate, which is the second question we asked. And then if you're not applying 100% of the material back on the job, what obstacles inhibited you from applying what you learned? What got in the way? And so what we were able to come up with is we then crunched the numbers to the first two questions in terms of what % you're applying back on the job and how confident are you that your estimate was accurate. And what we were able to do is come up with some some estimates of what the scrap learning looked like for that program. And so in the best case scenario, it looked like 57% of the material covered in that program is scrap learning. And the worst case scenario is 74% of the material covered in that program ended up as scrap learning. And the most likely case is simply an average between the two. So that'll give you some idea. And if you look at this, that is within the guidelines for Brinkerhoff. It exceeds what knowledge advisors found, where they looked at it and found 45%. So this one's a little out of the norm. This company was a little out of the norm based on the knowledge advisors data, but within the norm for the Brinkerhoff. And then the other thing, the third question is we asked, what obstacles, and so these were the things that the people in the random sample of people from the cohort identified. So 11 people said management got in the way. That's what kept me from applying what I learned. 10 people said, or not 10 people, but 10 times it came up. So some people may have mentioned several things. So policies and procedures, communication, so on down the line. So if you look at the scores from the MTSI scores, Manager Training Support Index scores, the fact that 10 out of 12 managers had negative scores. You look at the fact that the work environment, the learner work environment, had the lowest of the three components, was doing the least well at contributing to training transfer. Look at the items that are here on the top of the list, and it's pretty clear where they need to start to try to improve training transfer. So here's what we know. Which learners are most likely, at risk, and least likely to apply what they've learned? Which managers are likely to do a good and poor job of supporting the training? Which training transfer components are contributing the most and least to training transfer? The baseline scrap learning amount, so that we can now begin to manage that, because we have to have a baseline in order to manage it. And then obstacles inhibiting training transfer. So, any questions on the data? I know we're running short on time here, but we don't have a lot of data to share with the other steps. So any questions on the phase one data question?
Yes, we have a question from Jay. I'm going to actually unmute him so he can ask his question.
Okay.
All right, here we go.
Okay,
Jay?
can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, so I may have asked my question a little prematurely, but so when you say an algorithm, are you talking about the LAI and the, or is there a specific algorithm behind that?
Yes, the algorithm consists of those 12 factors that we talked about that related to the three training transfer components.
Okay, all right.
And whether you learned anything new, whether you saw the program as relevant, whether you were, whether you saw how the program contributed to your career development. So all those factors, all those 12 factors that we went through, all those are converted into survey items. And so and it's the data that we collect on those survey items and that's really what the algorithm is.
Okay, thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Any more?
Let me see. Let me just confirm. No, I don't see any other questions at this time.
Okay. So let's quickly talk about phase two, excuse me, solution implementation. And so this is where we're going to now that we have all the data, now what we need to do is to use that data to try to change the outcomes, for the better. And so we're going to focus on a number of different things, but I like this quote because, without facts, you're just another person with an opinion, and that was from W. Edwards Deming. And so, but what we now do have are facts. We've got some facts about this particular training program and what's working and what's not working. So we actually have data that we can use to begin to manage now the amount of scrap learning associated with that program. So this is step 5 is where the rubber meets the road. And so what we want to do is, now that we have all the data, we want to spend some time identifying solutions to mitigate or eliminate the obstacles to training transfer. So we got all those obstacles that we identified, where they had management, policies and procedures, all those things. So we know what obstacles were getting in the way and inhibiting people from applying what they learned. So we need to address those obstacles and try to eliminate them or mitigate them as best we can. Second thing we want to do is we want to target our at-risk, and those are the yellow people, and our least likely, those are the red people, learners, with reinforcement activities, because they're the ones that are least likely to go back and apply permanently what they've learned. So we need to provide them with a series of reinforcement things like email reminders, like little quizzes, little 1 or 2 item quizzes based on what was covered in the training, just as reminders, or maybe even micro-learning modules that might be sent out to people that attended the training. So what we're trying to do is move more of those people in the yellow and red into the green category, and that's what we're trying to do with those folks. And then we want to target managers with low or negative MTSI scores for help and support. This might include like one-on-one coaching, might include a job aid on what to do when you send somebody to training. What should you do before they come to training? What do you do while they're at training? What do you do when they come back from training? Could even involve maybe doing a training program for managers around how do you handle the situation when you're sending somebody to training? What should you do? And so there's a lot of different ways you can deal with that. And then manage the scrap learning baseline percentage, because that's what we're going to do, is try to do all these previous things so that we can begin to reduce scrap learning. The other thing we want to do is in phase 2, and this is step 6, is to validate the accuracy of the algorithm. You know, when we looked at the green, yellow, and red people, we want to know how accurate those, when we did those numbers, how accurate those divisions were and those categories were. And so prediction, because without validating your results, prediction without validation is nothing more than educated guessing at best and malfeasance at worst. So we want to know whether or not the algorithm, how accurately the algorithm we're able to predict the most likely at-risk and least likely people. So that's what we're doing with the level 2 and level 3 evaluations, is to validate that. So we correlate the results from the level 2 evaluations and level 3 evaluations with those learner application index scores to tell us whether or not they were accurate. And what we found with not the company that I shared the earlier data with, but another company that had used an earlier version of the model, and what we found with them is that there was about it was a 0.45 positive correlation between the LAI scores and whether or not people actually applied what they learned back on the job. So what that said is, the algorithm wasn't 100% accurate, which we knew was going to be the case, but it was reasonably accurate. It was better than guessing, and it was better than not knowing at all. The step 7 on phase 2 is to recalculate the scrap learning percentage. So we're going to take a new group of learners now who are going to attend the training program after this calibration cohort group, and now they're going to benefit from all the things that we learned and all the things that were implemented based on the data that we collected. And so what we want to do is ask this new wave of learners, same 3 questions. What % of the program material are you applying back on the job? How confident are you in your estimate? And what obstacles, if any, kept you from applying what you learned? So now what we're going to do is we'll compare the baseline scrap learning with the new scrap learning to see whether or not those things that we implemented had any positive effect on reducing scrap learning and increasing training transfer. Okay, so that's phase 2. Any questions on that one? I know I'm running over here, but I only got 2 more minutes.
No questions at this time.
Okay. So phase 3, report your results. This is real straightforward. So we want to report our results to key business executives and stakeholders. And that's why I said pick a program that they're interested in, not only for trying to gain their support and helping you collect the data that you need, but also they're going to be interested in the results. So phase 3, step 8 is to report out the results. And then phase 3, step 9 is, I've not done this with anybody yet, but I'm thinking that my thought process was here with the methodology. There's data, if a company has an LMS or an HRIS system, there's probably data, it's in that system, such as like how many training programs someone has attended, like if it's online learning, how many programs did they start but not finish, and how many years they've been in the company, what department they work in. There's some other data in there that we can add into the algorithm in addition to those 12 factors and increase the accuracy of our predictions when we sort people into the green, yellow, and red categories. But as I said, I haven't done this with anybody, but it's there, just waiting to happen. So quick summary, the issue of scrap learning has been around forever, but what's different today is that with predictive learning analytics, there now is a way to measure and manage it. So, questions?
I don't see any questions coming through.
Okay. Let me just say I do have an ebook that I've created. This is a little out of date, but it's still about 95% accurate. And if you are interested in the ebook, if you just send me an email, I would be happy to send it to you. But it overviews the whole methodology and talks about the data, talks about the algorithm. The algorithm is the part of it is not completely up to date because there's some new variables I've added in there since doing the ebook. But it's still, as I said, 95% accurate. So if you're interested in the ebook as a way to kind of summarize what we talked about today, I'm happy to send it to you. And I've also got a bunch of articles I've written about the methodology. These are real short and sweet, and I'm happy to send those to you. And you just need to email me. You can see it here, Ken at phillipsassociates.com. Just write ebook and articles, and I'll send them to you.
Yeah, we have a, let me see. We have a question.
Okay.
Hold on. I hope I'm saying your name correctly. So how do you collect data for our learning work environment index? If then to who do you give it?
Sorry, say it again. How do you collect survey?
How do you collect data for learning work environment index? And if this is a survey, then whom would you send it, or whom would you give it to?
We're asking the learners to answer those questions about how likely their manager is to have a post-training program discussion with them. So we're asking the learners to answer that question. We're also asking the learners how likely their work colleagues are to support what they've learned in this program. When they get back to the job, how likely are their work colleagues to support what they've learned and when they try to use it. And we're also asking the learners, the third one was, how soon after how likely are they to have immediate opportunity to apply what they learned. So we're asking the learners all those questions, all 12 questions that relate to each of the 3 training transfer components. So the learners are providing us with that data.
Okay, he has it. Thank you.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because they're going to know. I mean, they'll, unless they're a brand new employee, someone's going to know if I've gone to training before. They would have some idea about what their manager is likely to do with them when they get back. Is the manager going to even talk to them or even mention the fact that they've gone to training, or what's likely to happen? And the same thing with their colleagues. I mean, if they've gone to training before, and again, they're not a brand new employee, they would have some idea about how their colleagues are likely to react if they start to apply new things that they learned. And are the work colleagues going to be supportive of that, or are they going to not be supportive?
Mm-hmm. Okay, I don't see other questions or hands raised, so I think that is it.
Okay. All right, Ken, thank you so very much. This was very interesting information, and I took lots of notes. I hope everybody else took lots of notes, and I hope you guys have a very nice rest of the day and the weekend. Enjoy your life. Have a great day, and thanks for attending.
Thank you, everybody. Yep, and if you've got other questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to, either respond by email or we can set up a call to talk about things. So